It's Christmas Day. You wake up in your Toy Story pajamas and you wake up your parents who definitely told you not to wake them up until 8 o'clock, and you run to that tree. You catch a particularly large box that stands out under the tree. You open an Xbox 360. That big box gives you endless memories, whether it's punching cows in Minecraft, having extreme fevers in Peggle, killing excessively in Call of Duty, or beating some random guy at the brick in Grand Theft Auto. Or you're lame like me and got a Wii. Now, this is probably what you think of when you think of the word video game. But I want to take you to a time where video games looked like this. No, I mean like this. This is the early 1980s, the age of blasting Olivia Newton-John's physical in your Walkman, pulling up your leg warmers, and where the Cold War hadn't ended yet.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
As aforementioned, video games looked like this. What you didn't know is that we're coming to an end. Games are expensive nowadays. When we buy video games, it's an investment. We want that investment to feel like you got out what you put in. This is reflected in how we see the quality of a video game. Now imagine you buy a video game, which again looks like this, and you don't like it. Whatever. You tell your friends at the lunch table and move on. But what if all games on that shelf are games of that level of quality? This is one of the problems that led to the crash. Like, you know Pac-Man? This is Pac-Man. Maybe if you have a little class, this is Pac-Man. Now you see Pac-Man on the shelf at your local video game store, and you think, this Pac-Man. And you get home and you see this. This was a common problem in the video game world, but there was one particular game I would like to highlight. Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial is undeniably an icon in American pop culture, and especially in the early 80s. Video game tie-in games are something we are mostly familiar with. I mean, we all have a copy of Cars for Rewriting in our basement somewhere. E.T. is no different. The problem is E.T. hit the silver screen in the summer of 1982. The game will come out later that holiday season. Back in the 80s, you didn't have a game in development while the movie was being made. You had to license out your property after the fact. Licensing takes time. You couldn't just get the licensing for the hit of the summer by calling up old Steven. So, by the time that Atari got the licensing for the game, they had 5 weeks until executives wanted a working game. 5 weeks. I don't know if you've ever seen a video game, but making one takes a lot of time. Just look at GTA 6 or Elder Scrolls. To complete this crazy task, they tasked one Howard Scott Warshaw. Warshaw's resume was not barren. He had developed hits for Atari like Yar's Revenge and Raiders of the Lost Ark. He was a talented developer. Again, he had 5 weeks to make the game. The game actually sold well that holiday season. However, players found the open and different locations to be confusing. And players, much like a young Shia LaBeouf, do not like holes. The game featured hard-to-predict holes that were unclear how to get out of. The game basically halted in sales and returns began to pile up. When the game sold well at launch, naturally Atari began to ramp up production of the game. But these copies will go unsold to retailers. Because they had so much stock in returns, they halted sales. So, Atari, faced with this little pickle, decided to bury them in a landfill in the New Mexican desert. This happened. When someone mentions gaming, many people think of the console wars of the late aughts and early teens. The infamous Xbox versus PlayStation debate plagued the back of English classes for the better part of a decade and a half, with Nintendo either competing out all of them or not knowing what to do with their biggest financial failure. So for most of us Zoomers, there's only been the big three. Back in the early 80s, there was 3 times that. From Intellivision to ColecoVision, there was something for everyone. They all had different games that were all the same game, but with different names. There were more than 20 major consoles launched between the year of 1976 and 1983. The main hard hitters that you may recognize are the Commodore 64, the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, and the Atari 2600. A trend during this era of home consoles was releasing a sequel to the console that already come out, Consoles such as the Intellivision 2 and the Channel F2 were not meant to be a generational jump in graphics and computing power, rather they were more of a mid-generation refresh of the console, a la PlayStation 4 Slim or Xbox One S. This just made even more confusion to the consumer. These companies got to the point where they were selling officially licensed adapters for the consoles so they can play cartridges from competing consoles. That's basically being able to play a PlayStation disc on an Xbox. All this competition led to fatigue with consumers as they could not keep up with whose console was better. This made parents angry and confused as they didn't understand why their kid wanted one console over the other, and what games to buy to put under their family's Christmas tree. This led to parents not wanting their kids to play video games anymore, resulting in the crash. During the crash, retailers began to cut prices and do any little thing they can to move stock, but people didn't bite. To the public, video games seemed to be a fad that had come and gone, much of the likes of Stanley Cups and cryptocurrency. The industry had compressed by 97% between the years of 1983 and 1985. But there was one particular company who had a trick up their sleeve. Nintendo was a little-known Japanese card company founded in 1889. A few years later, shredded wheat was invented. They started out making playing cards, but by the late 70s and early 80s, Nintendo had gotten into the toy and video game industry, where their home console, the Famicom, was taking off in Japan. Naturally, they wanted to expand their product outside their country. They began brainstorming a way to bring their console over to America in the wake of the crash. The people at Nintendo of America came up with the idea to market this system as not a video game console, but a toy system. They began to greatly redesign the Famicom and had many iterations, which, if I could, take a second to appreciate the design that was shown off before the final design. I haven't even finished editing this, but I know it's just making my pants tighter just thinking about it. But the design would have had it cost like $1,000, $1980, so. But they finally came up with a design that is recognizable today. The design was big and boxy, with the user having to insert the cartridge from the side like a VCR. The other ace that Nintendo of America had up their sleeve was an accessory that had been released in Japan known as the Family Computer Robot. And they took this concept as an opportunity to conduct their own Trojan horse scheme. They planned to ship the accessory with the console and market not only it, but the whole system as a toy. Doing this effectively moved the NES from the electronics section to the toy section. They also packed in things like the Zapper light gun to further show that it is a toy system and not a video game console. Since there wasn't much of a market slowdown on toys, the NES caught on. Nintendo of America's Trojan horse had worked and allowed for the release of exceptional, high-quality games to be released with the system that are the start of series that are still beloved today, like Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, and Final Fantasy. The video game crash now serves as a joke to the industry, but without it, we wouldn't have the industry we have today. It taught a lesson in consumer fatigue in that losing respect for the consumer is something that corporations need to understand. It is something that is relevant now with gaming bombs that are caused by corporate greed like Anthem and more recently Skull and Bones. It's something worth being aware about in the vast sea of American history. Big thank you to my mentor and the biggest help for this project, Mr. David Drosky of Montrose High School. I have a document with all my sources linked in the description, and thank you to you, the viewer, for watching.